The Supreme Court has been hearing oral arguments in Fisher v. US, a case that could determine whether January 6 rioters can be prosecuted using obstruction charges. Now, the outcome of the court's decision not only has implications for the rioters themselves, some of whom have already been convicted and sentenced in the case of obstructing government proceedings, but it could also impact Trump and the indictments he faces.
Yes, I have some surprising opinions on this. So do some of the Supreme Court justices. So this is going to have plenty of twists and turns.
So let's lay out the case for you all, and then we can discuss where we fall on this issue, because it's not as easy as one would think, right? There are implications not just for the rioters themselves, but also potentially peaceful protesters. And so the court seems deeply divided on a federal law that prosecutors in the January 6th case used to charge more than 350 January 6th protesters and rioters. Now, some of the conservative justices are concerned and worried that this form of prosecution would give the government the ability to squash peaceful protests, or even those who heckle and disrupt court proceedings. And so they want to ensure that the government doesn't go overboard in punishing individuals who engage in these types of demonstrations. Now, defense attorneys also allege that January 6 prosecutors basically improperly interpreted the law and stretched it to go after these Trump supporters. And more than 120 of the rioters from January 6th have already been convicted of the obstruction charges. 60 of them have already been sentenced. The offense, by the way, is punishable by up to 20 years in prison. However, for first-time offenders, on average, they will get sentenced to around 1 to 4 years in prison. Now, prosecutors like the obstruction charge because it's actually much harsher in sentencing. It gives them more leverage when they're engaging in plea negotiations, so they like to kind of use that as like a threat, the lengthy potential sentence as a threat to what the defendant could face in terms of time behind bars. And then federal rioting, on the other hand, which is something they could be charged with instead, is actually punishable by up to 5 years behind bars. But they don't want to use that because they feel that they don't have as much leverage in plea negotiations by using that charge instead. Now, Washington Post reports that without the obstruction charge, prosecutors would struggle to find charges punishable by more than a year in prison. Felony counts, in other words, for even the most notorious nonviolent conduct by riot participants who raided the Senate floor, hunted for lawmakers, chased police officers, and ransacked congressional offices. And so some are concerned that if the court rules against prosecutors' ability to use the obstruction charge as it pertains to the January 6 rioters, well, then a lot of them will be let off easy. And to be sure, even before the Supreme Court has decided this case, Cenk, 3 of the January 6 defendants have already had their sentences reduced ahead of the Supreme Court's decision. All 2 of the individuals are from Delaware, a Delaware man who carried a Confederate flag into the Capitol and will be let go 1 year into his 3-year term. You also have an Ohio man who overran police lines and became one of the first rioters to enter the Capitol building. He will be set free 6 months into a 19-month term. And then finally, a man who entered the just evacuated Senate chamber with a Trump flag and a cape. He was released after serving 5 months of a 14-month term.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
So some are already having their sentences reduced, but I'm really curious where you stand on this issue, Cenk.
Yeah, I think this one's complicated and a lot of things depend. So let's break it down. Number one, the question is, first question is, should this charge even exist? And my answer to that is yes, it should exist. Because the original idea was if you're trying to block government from doing its official duties as part of, it's under the umbrella of rebellion, right? And so we've got people who are insurrectionists, and part of what they're doing is they're preventing Congress from their proceedings and trying to undermine the United States government. And it doesn't just have to be Congress, but that's why it's such a serious charge. But the huge but is, what do you apply it to? So if you're applying it to something that is actually an overt physical act against our government, that makes sense. If you're applying it to just protesters who are rowdy, that's a disaster. Right. Don't do that, right? And so then it is a legitimate discussion for the Supreme Court to have. Yes, but where do we draw the line? What do these words that are not super clear mean, and how do you apply them? So for example, if you're on the left, be careful what your opinion here is. I know a lot of people love to do the binary stuff. Okay, January 6th right wing, so we're against it, so we love this law. But hold on, what if you're a pro-peace protester who's protesting what's happening in Gaza, and you blocked City Hall, and you were a little too aggressive, and all of a sudden they put obstructing government charge on you.
Right.
And that's a 20-year charge.
I mean, another example would be, let's think of it in a hyper-local scenario where, let's say the city council is trying to hold their regular city council meeting, a rowdy group of activists show up and they're so aggressive that it shuts down the city council meeting altogether. I think about cases like that because I want to think about this I want to think about these laws being applied to people that I might agree with politically. And to be honest with you, even when it pertains to people who I tend to agree with politically, it does bother me when their form of protest is specifically meant to shut a government proceeding down.
But would you agree with me that 20 years for that is insanity?
I do agree with you on that. I think 20 years is absolutely insanity, yes.
Yeah, and even if they're not getting 20 years, which these guys aren't, right? In reality, they're getting about a couple of years and being let off early at that anyway. But still, you have the potential to get 20 years. And by the way, if you're protesting on behalf of Palestinian rights, you're probably gonna get 20 years if they apply this to you, right? Because you get different standards for different political folks, and everybody in the country that isn't asleep knows that, right? So, okay, so let's be really careful with this law. So were they careful in this law? Okay, now I have a different opinion than the Supreme Court justices. The Supreme Court justices, for two of them, Alito and Thomas, be gay is a problem for them. I'm gonna explain what that means in a second, okay? So.
No, I'm dying to know, I'm curious what you mean.
Okay, all right, so then I'll interweave both of those things. So Begay is a earlier case, just happens to be the name of the case, that Alito and Thomas said, broad construction of criminal statutes, great, no problem, because they're right-wingers, so they want to punish people as much as humanly possible. And they're the most extreme right-wingers. So they're like, otherwise. What does the word otherwise mean? It means drunk driving. And other people are like, you sure it means drunk driving? They're like, yeah, good enough, put them behind bars. But now the criminals are on their side. So all of a sudden they're like, I don't know that Begay is applicable here. I don't know that would. I mean, I would distinguish it from with using other words. All of a sudden, right? So these are the problems with justices that don't actually have any principles. They've been pretending to have principles all along, like states' rights. Come on, that's such a joke now. No one believes that anyone's ever applied states' rights in a principled fashion. Okay, so that's a problem for them. But something that's a saving grace for the right-wing justices who want to rule on behalf of the January 6th defendants, and it appears based on their questioning that they do want to vote in that favor. That's why Alito and Thomas are like, Begay, I don't know that it applies here. In other words, okay, you want to let these guys off, and it's pretty obvious. So
well, okay, so let me jump in with some caveats and nuances, because it's not that their line of questioning doesn't necessarily indicate that they want to let the rioters off per se.
Lower charges.
They're arguing that there are other charges that could be implemented. It's just that the prosecutors don't want to use those charges because they carry a lower sentence.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and again, I don't begrudge them the discussion and the debate, because I think it is an important discussion and debate. I'll tell you which side I'm gonna come out in a second. But one last thing for the justices that are important, the ones who do wanna lower the charges against these January 6 guys, they have a couple of huge cases in their favor. And that is the bribery cases. Since the Supreme Court loves bribery, in Citizens United they made bribery legal. You just have to call it a campaign contribution, but they did that also in Buckley and Bellotti all the way back in the 1970s. So, but in the latest round of cases, Governor McDonnell in Virginia and Governor Christie and his goons, advisors in New Jersey, were up on some bribery charges, not Christie, but his advisors. And the Supreme Court's like, oh, those are Republican governors, and we love bribery. No way we're convicting them. So they're like, yeah, really narrow interpretation of the law, okay? So when they want to punish you for drunk driving or anything else, they're gonna have a really broad interpretation. When it comes to their beloved crooked politicians or right-wing activists, very narrow definition. No, I don't think, no, we don't charge him with bribery. I mean, all he did was take all his watch and money and etc.
True, you're right.
So those are precedents that are on the side of the January 6th guys. Congratulations, you're on the side of the officials who got bribed. Anyways, okay. But there's more nuance.
Okay, so let me interject with a question. However, if the Supreme Court, if the conservative justices decide this case in a way that we are both predicting, in that they will say that the prosecution should not have used this law, this obstruction law against the rioters, wouldn't that also set a precedent that would then protect other demonstrators regardless of what their political ideology happens to be?
Yeah, it would theoretically, and I would be in favor of that, and that's what's going to be the nuance. But you know how America is. If you're a right-wing protest, that's the reason they're so mad about January 6th is it's the first time the right wing has ever been held accountable for anything, right? Whereas if you're a left-wing protester and you're like, hey, oil companies, can you please not kill us all? They're like, that's it, lock them up, throw away the key. In fact, several states have passed laws saying you could run over as protesters. I mean, of course not right-wing protesters, but if they're left-wing or in favor of peace, or the planet or something, just run them over and kill them, who cares, right? So how will it be applied is also a giant question. Okay, finally, my opinion is, guys, if you're going to apply this statute, you have to show that it was part of an orchestrated movement to make sure that the government did not function. Not like, hey, a bunch of January 6th guys got riled up by Trump, and then they broke in and try to go to the bathroom in Nancy Pelosi's office. Okay, that's bad, but those are other charges, right? But if it is coordinated, which by the way, I think it was, another caveat coming up on that, but it coordinated to block these proceedings so they could send it back to the states where they had their fake electors ready, and then send those to Congress and have the Republicans in Congress in the House just declare Trump the president. Well, then it was obstruction of the government, and it was part of a big plot to do a coup. Now, but the main question there, guys, is was there a plan and was there intent?
Right.
And the number one problem with that is that people in power hate prosecuting the elites. So the January 6th guys who have been prosecuted, all non-elites, super easy to put them away.
Ordinary people, yeah.
Yeah, ordinary people, you can stuff them into prison all day, all night. It used to be just left-wingers, but congratulations, right-wingers. Now you could also be stuffed into prison. But your leaders, oh, no. Why haven't they brought charges against Navarro? I mean, Navarro is now in jail for another reason because he refused to comply with a subpoena.
Contempt of Congress,
okay,
right.
But they've never charged him with the plot he wrote about in a book, where they would have the rioters go in. Basically, this is the essence of the plan cobbled together from several sources, where they would go in, they would block the proceedings, so the Republicans go, I guess we got to go back to the states, etc., etc. So so the Proud Boy leader was charged, the Oath Keeper leader was charged, but the government never connected them to the fake elector plot, which was the actual coup.
Right.
So if you're not gonna charge the elites who actually orchestrated this coup, then you don't get to make this charge against the regular schmoes who broke into Congress. So if they overturn this and say, no, this charge does not apply to these guys, it could, but I agree with them that it shouldn't in this case, because the government never charged the leaders of this. And if you didn't charge the leaders and you didn't prove a conspiracy to obstruct the government, then you shouldn't apply this to the average guy who made a colossal error and broke other laws and should be held accountable, but not accountable for this depth of charge, this serious a charge.
This is what I think.
Uh-oh, here it comes.
Counsel Uger, you make a compelling case, and I think I agree with you entirely.
Yeah, that's not really how judges rule, but okay.
I did my best, okay? I didn't go to Columbia Law School here, all right?
No, you're supposed to have, here, give the to me.
Yeah,
okay.
you show us where you got that fancy degree for.
Okay,
All right.
Prosecuted, okay? Counsel Uger, not guilty. Wait, he's counsel, not, all right, never mind. I just wanted to have fun.
All right. Well, we've got a lot more news to get to. Before we do, though, Cenk has one more thing to mention.
No, I just wanted to say, hashtag fairest show in America.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.